Yes, ma'am. Here,
And
continue.
I'm going to just have this on for a moment. Go ahead and get set up.
Okay, let's see. IG Live. Are we good now? We are live. This is day 2 of our discussion Zionism in the Black Church, hosted by Every Black Life Matters. So those of you who were with us yesterday, welcome back. Those of you, this is your first time, welcome here. The host is Miss Regina Roundtree. It is on Clubhouse. If you go to the 1040 window house on Clubhouse, you can listen to the audio there. And it's also being streamed on Facebook, both on Every Black Life Matters, and then also on the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel fan page, if I clicked on everything the right way. So we'll see. So welcome everybody. Hey, how you doing? I think I see a Deborah there. How you doing, Deborah? Debbie, I see. I think it's an Irving that's there. It's a combination of my eyes not working as well as I used to, and kind of how the screen is positioned there. So I think we're good. Yep. So welcome everybody. Regina is again our host. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yeah, I was just going to go ahead and finish and then I'll...
No. I was just saying Regina's our host, and I was just kind of testing everything out, making sure that we're good to go on everything. So Regina, you let me know, ma'am.
Nope, we're good. So we are going to get started in Clubhouse in just a moment. So if you would share this room, that would be greatly appreciated, and ping some people in that you think would be interested in joining our conversation. We had a great conversation yesterday, and we are going to do a recap in just a moment. I want to give a little more time for some people to come in the room, but no longer than 2 minutes. I like to start on time, but I do realize that it takes a while for the alerts to go out to people, especially in Clubhouse. I understand that there is sometimes even a 5 to 7 minute delay from the time the room starts to the time that it goes out. So,
yes, ma'am.
Mama D, good to see you. Melissa, thank you for joining us. And let's share the room. I'm going to share it now, and then ping some other people in.
Yes, ma'am, I am as well. I noticed, Regina, that as happens on Clubhouse, we were there together about a couple of hours. About hour 1 or somewhere after that, I saw the room getting larger, maybe as we were getting close to kind of landing that plane. So as people were seeing and coming in, of course, those who missed it could check out the replay there, both on Clubhouse, but on YouTube as well. But yeah, I did notice that that kind of happens on Clubhouse. People start to come in when they realize that it's up. So we will give them an opportunity here. If you're there in IG Live.
Lonnie?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Oh, Lonnie's there.
I was just speaking to Lonnie.
Yes, ma'am.
And inviting him up.
Yes, ma'am. If you're on IG Live, again, this is day 2 of Zionism in the Black Church. We are streaming on Clubhouse. This is being hosted by Every Black Life Matters. The Clubhouse house is 1040 Window Mission Network. So if you either see mine or you see the 1040 Window Mission Network or Regina Roundtree, just click on that and you can join us there on Clubhouse. If you're on IG, you got the video and the audio. So hopefully you guys are hearing everything clear. If not, you guys, someone just give me a heads up, everything. And as we are in this discussion here on today, day 2, we had a good discussion on yesterday. Regina is a wonderful host, and I'm going to kind of let her guide us and lead us here while we talk about the contents of the book and the work of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. You can go to our website, ibsi.org, and find out more about our work, including our upcoming trip to Israel. Today is Monday. Yeah, we leave in 6 days. I can't wrap my brain around that because we're not quite finished getting ready to go. So we're doing a bunch of stuff. But yeah, we leave for the Holy Land in a little while, and I'm sure we'll kind of say some more about that too. So yeah. Regina, you can hear me okay, ma'am? Uh-oh. Regina, make sure I got your audio still. I don't hear you coming out of Clubhouse.
There we go.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Got you. Got you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
All right.
So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this day 2 of our conversation. And so, this is actually being hosted by the 1040 Window Mission. I do work with Every Black Life Matters, but this is a particular project for the 1040 Window Mission Network because we are interested in building relationships with nations in the 1040 window. Israel is very key to that. And what we do understand as well is that Christianity, especially among the Black church, African Americans, there's a lot of miseducation, misunderstanding about Israel, about the connection between Africa and Israel. And so we're going to review some of that that we talked about yesterday. We do apologize for the audio yesterday on our YouTube and Facebook. There was a lot of feedback. We are going to try to repost it because we do have clean audio from Clubhouse. So in a couple days, I will try to replace the audio from day 1, but you are now in day 2. And we thought that we were going to get through like 2 or 3 chapters maybe of the book, and we only got through chapter 1. And I don't even think we quite finished chapter 1. So we're going to do a review and then go into chapter 2. I want to give a moment. I just want to open us up in a word of prayer, and then I'm going to ask Pastor Dumasani to just introduce himself again for those of you who are new. Just to give a quick intro, and then we'll talk about your trip that you're taking, and then we will dive into the book. So let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity, for this time to come together and to fellowship, to learn about you, to learn about the love you have for Jerusalem. We thank you for Israel, and you have told us in your word that you will bless those that bless them, and you will curse those who curse them. And we do know that that is the line of Abraham. And so that means that all of his children are included in this blessing and in this cursing. And so we are careful, and we are here to learn more about the diaspora. We are here to learn more about the relationship between the continent of Africa and the nation of Israel. And we're here to learn more about the struggles that are happening and the miseducation and misinformation that has been brought forth. We thank you that you welcome your spirit. Holy Spirit is welcome here as you give us wisdom and discernment. Help us to answer all questions, and we thank you for drawing people in. We thank you that this conversation will edify you in all ways. And we ask this in the name of Jehovah. Amen. So, Pastor Dumasani, if you can, in like quick 2 minutes, just tell us a little bit of your background, and then please do tell us about the trip that you have with Peace, where you're going to Israel in a few days.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, thank you, Regina, again for the hosting the space here. I'm Dumisani Washington. I'm the founder and the CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, which was founded in 2013 after my first trip to Israel, which was 2012. And a long history of love for Israel, love for Africa, a lot of these different things kind of intertwining together in my life. I started this organization in the summer of 2013. I spoke across the country, synagogues, churches, universities, and after a year, joined the staff of Christians United for Israel for a little less than 7 years as the National Diversity Outreach Coordinator. Returned to this original organization that I started in June of 2021. And our focus here is to strengthen the relationship, the solidarity between Africa and Israel, and the Black and Jewish communities, not just in the United States, but in the diaspora. So we do that in a number of different ways, but our organization had three different branches to the tree. One is the Speakers Bureau, in which myself and other staff members speak across the country in different parts of the world. And number two is the library resource and graphics, those types of things, videos, these types of things that we share that are teaching tools, which education is the key point of what we do. And then, of course, lastly, the Peace Initiative that you mentioned is a active wing in which we recruit Black men and women from across the country. The pilot program started in September 2020. In which they do a study in different topics surrounding Israel, ancient Israel, modern Israel, the Palestinian conflict, all these different types of topics that relate to it, including the Black-Jewish synergy and all of those. We take 2 trips. December was the motherland. We went to South Africa for about 10 days, had an amazing, amazing time. Learning and discovering, and then June will be the Holy Land. In a few days, we head to Israel. We'll be there for 10 days as well. And these young people will return and be the hub of Black Jewish synergy in their cities across the country. They are from the west to the east coast. And we will be starting the second round of that on Juneteenth. We'll launch both the IPSI pastors and the IPSI ambassadors. So they can, if you want to find out any more, just go to ibsi.org, ibsi.org, and you can learn more about it.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, just quickly about your trip and how. So, to be a peace ambassador, what are the requirements, and when's the next open enrollment?
The next open enrollment, it begins June 19th, Juneteenth, which is Monday this year. Juneteenth, Monday, June 19th. And there is an enrollment. There's actually, you can go to, again, ibsi.org. The process is this. They click on the link. You'll see the website there, a little video and information. You would fill out the information if you're wanting to become an IPSI ambassador. And what that entails is, again, a 9-month journey. Where, again, once a month they come together. We have different topics that we study. Different speakers are both, they're Israeli, they're African, they're American, and all these different topics surrounding Israel and Africa. And there's so many other things, United Nations, everything. But before all that happens, after the application period or process, Regina, we do an interview. There's a team on our staff that actually interviews each enrollee or potential enrollee for the main purposes that of defining if the person is a good fit for the actual peace initiative, right? And peace, again, is an acronym for Plan for Education, Advocacy, and Community Engagement, right? Want to make sure that the person who is signing up, that they understand what it is that they're doing, what the types of things we'll be learning together. And also we're looking at their involvement, right? So for the pastors, it's a little bit separate track in terms of some of the theological things that we deal with and where they are, not so much where they are geographically, but again, kind of their ministry and their thinking through this whole Israel thing. And we kind of have a conversation with them. For the IPSI ambassadors themselves, they don't have to be clergy, right? They're teachers and these amazing, I can't say enough about them. They're these young men and women. A couple of them are young ministers, right? A couple of them are educators. One is actually deaf and mute and does education in that sphere and everything. And they are absolutely amazing. I get kind of emotional, like my kids, right? So they are amazing. The trip to South Africa, which was just amazing. So they do all this, and we vet them in that sense. And then once our team says if they can see them on the bus, right? The tour guys were going around all from place to place. And then, yes, when they return home within their vocations, whether they're educators, whether they're ministers, whether they're in sports, whatever else like that, we talk to them and we work through how do we continue this partnership in their area, whether there's pastors and rabbis, whether there's other community things that happen. Our concept here at IPSI is that we don't try to recreate any type of Black Jewish synergy. It's as old as Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald, and has found for centuries in this country, in the millennia when you're talking about Africa's relationship with Israel. So we want to highlight those things and continue those things moving forward, in large part, Regina, as I know we'll get into in the book later, as we talk some more, that there's so many enemies to that relationship. There's so much antagonism when it comes to that it's very much directed. So we teach our ambassadors to be aware of those things and to strengthen those things for all the positive reasons that they have been for a very, very long time. Oh, I'm sorry. I think you're muted. Oh, hold on 1 second, everybody. There we go. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes, ma'am.
To remember to come off mute.
Yes, ma'am.
On Clubhouse.
No problem.
So you said that very fast.
Oh.
And what?
Yes, ma'am. I'll work on that.
What I want to say to everyone who is just listening is that please go to the IPSI website, which is www.I, B as in boy, S as in Sam, I.org. Okay, just 4 letters, IBSI.org. Go to that website and you will be able to learn more about their peace initiative, which is your opportunity to enter a 9-month program where they teach you about Black solidarity, so the Africa-Israel relationship. You will go on a trip to South Africa, and you will also go on a trip to the Holy Land. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, and the purpose of that is so you can come back after you've completed your 9-month program and be able to engage, right, in conversations in your community, in your church, where you work, however it is, you will be well equipped to have the conversation of the positive relationships between Africa, the African diaspora, which would include Black America, and Israel. So you'll want to go to that website to get more information. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Now that we got that done, you got to slow down.
Yes, ma'am. I'll slow down. Yes, ma'am.
We're drinking from a fire hose here.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's get into a little bit of a review from yesterday. I think one of, if any of you were here yesterday, if there was something you want to put in the chat that really stood out to you. But as you guys probably know, if you were here or if you're not, that I totally love the section on the Negro spirituals. Like that's my thing. It's just amazing to me the way when you take the time to read those spirituals and begin to understand that the African slaves, they knew about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? They knew those stories. Like Europeans, they didn't need to teach them about Jesus, right? Because they knew the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They knew and understood those relationships. You could tell it by the songs that they sung and the way that the words that they used and the stories that they told. And we did read a quote directly from Psalm 137, which was just so intriguing about the way that Psalm 137, 1 through 6 paralleled the way that Europeans and white slave owners would ask the slaves to sing and dance and entertain me, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you read Psalm 137, 1 through 6, you'll see that the Hebrews were going through the same thing. They were in captivity, and their captives were telling them to sing and dance and entertain.
Right.
Just really fascinating. So that was good. But I want you, if you can, Pastor Giussani, is to just give us again, just talk about how the curse of Ham, which is really the curse of Canaan, because that is a miseducation that we have in our community, and that there's nowhere in the Bible that the curse on Canaan was black skin or dark skin. Right. So I'm going to stop there and allow you to take your time and kind of explain that for us, will you? Please.
So the narrative of Noah and his sons after the flood, there is a story, those of you who are aware of it. These are chapters 8, 9, and 10, leading up to the genealogy of nations in the book of Genesis. And Noah, the Bible says, became drunk and his son Ham saw his nakedness and did not cover him. He left out of the tent, and then Ham's other brothers, Shem and Japhet, covered Noah. And that when Noah awoke, meaning when he was sober again, he then said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be." And so we discussed that the curse of Ham, quote unquote, has been what has been called and used to justify, among many other things, slavery of Africans. Right? It's nowhere in the scriptures. No one literally says, "Cursed be Canaan," and many believe that part of the fulfillment of that curse was that the Israelites eventually inhabit the land of Canaan. Now, what I didn't mention, and I won't get into here, we talked about it yesterday, Regina, about kind of the, I hate to use that term, shallow and deeper than the pool, because it's not a negative thing, right? We're dealing with some basic things, right, here. And at some point, we'll kind of, hopefully together, we'll get into some other things. And the reason I mention that is because the Jewish sages have a lot of discussion around this. As a matter of fact, my wife and I, when we were in Jerusalem a couple of months ago, I'll be going back and forth to Israel several times this year, had a chance to sit down with a young man, Orthodox Jewish young man there in Jerusalem. We had been kind of messaging each other back on LinkedIn, and we sat down and we had a long, it must have been a 1.5 hour, if not more, talk right there in his art gallery, right? And I'm so glad my wife was there because she's taking notes, right? We're talking about Ham, we're talking about Shem, we're talking about Eleazar and Abram and Abraham, Queen of Sheba, Solomon, just amazing, amazing stuff. He's sharing stuff, I'm sharing stuff. I learned some things, I shared some things with him. And just suffice to say that it even goes further than that, Ham's relationship both with throughout Abraham and Abraham's seed. So suffice to say that when we're talking about this whole curse of Ham, it has always been a misnomer. And among many other things, it was used by some in the Christian church to justify not just the enslavement of Africans, but the subjugation of people of color, right? That not just says slave, Jim Crow, there would be this mindset by those who call themselves Christians. It's amazing. I remember in Frederick Douglass's autobiography, My Bondage, My Freedom, he became a Christian at a very young age. And those who haven't read it before, his is not a unique story. Many, many, many of the Black pioneers, both during slavery and after, were devout Christians. They had no problem talking about their faith in God, their love of the Word of God, all of those things. And they weren't duped. They weren't serving what was quote unquote a quote unquote white man's God. None of those things. They recognized that God was a just God and was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who delivered the children of Israel. Frederick Douglass said, and I can't remember the chapter, Regina, and I'll pause and give it to you. He said that he was on one of the plantations where he served. That particular master was really wicked. Now, he served on several different ones, and not all of them were the same. Some were better tempered, if you were. They weren't as abusive, the type, and some were just downright evil, right? So this particular one was a really, really mean man. And there was a traveling kind of evangelical tent meeting thing that had come through the town, right? And this man, his master, Frederick Douglass's master, got saved. He went down to the altar, right? The whole thing, and they prayed with him, and the whole thing. So they were all watching. He said, Frederick Douglass says they were all watching to see what kind of man he would become. He got worse. And that was his narration. His narration was, he said, Christianity, and I can't remember the exact quote, didn't help everybody. So this particular man was those manifestation. He got him some Jesus, right? And he was even more wicked to the slaves, more abusive and everything. And he learned at a young age. He didn't make him discount God. It just made him recognize that folks would use the God thing and the Jesus thing for all kinds of stuff. That's where that mindset of that curse of Ham thing was. Yeah, curse of Ham meant I get to treat Black people like this. They get to sit at the back. They get to, those types of things. That is nowhere in the scripture. And it's been going on for so long. Some people to this day, as you know, Regina, still believe that, Black or white, they believe that somehow that story about Noah and his sons was God declaring Black people. Nothing could be further from the truth. It had nothing to do with skin color, nothing to do with Black people being slaves. So that's one of the things I think we were trying to lay to rest there as we were talking on yesterday.
That's good. And one of the too. But one of the other things that you talked about that I thought was so interesting is the way that the progenies of Ham, Shem, and Japheth kind of moved out across the earth.
Yes.
Right. And so when we talk about Ham, when we talk about Shem, and that's the Semites, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Semitic.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know from Shem comes Abraham, Terah, and then Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that Abraham comes from the line of Shem.
Mm-hmm.
But and that they moved into what would be, did you say up north? Did they go to Europe? Are they
yes. So that would be Japhet or Japheth. That would be the progenitors of what we call Europe, the European nations from there. Yes, ma'am. That'd be Japheth. Shem would be the Hebrews, and then of course Ham would be the Africans in there. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Shem would be kind of the Middle East.
Yes,
in
ma'am.
The middle there.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then Ham would move down. And so we talked about Cush
Mm-hmm.
and Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
We discussed all that. So have to listen to the replay because we want to get into chapter 2, right? And where we are in chapter 2 in your book, I'm going to pull it open, is that I don't see any comments in the chat, so we're good to keep on moving.
I think so.
We're going to get into the Jewish diaspora and the prophetic return to Israel. So, if we could, one more time, could you?
Sure.
I'm really low on audio, huh?
Oh, they say you're too low. And yeah. Good. And IG, if you all can't hear you, let me know. We got it going, but if you need it louder, let me know. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any way you can move your Clubhouse closer to the mic? Your iPad. That's where I'm coming from.
I tell you what, let's do this.
You want to try the speakers?
Yes, ma'am. I'll try that and see just a quick little switch here, and you let me know if there's any problems that are there. Yes, ma'am. Can you hear?
I guess what we need to do is ask you to, Ms. Martinez, am I louder now? Can you hear me better? Pookie, that's her name, Pookie Martinez on YouTube. Can you hear me?
We're checking up the audio.
Than before. Oh, there's a delay. I forgot about that.
I hear you loud and clear.
I know, but you're on Clubhouse. We're talking about on, we're trying to, nope, sorry, it's not coming through louder. I don't know how else I can make it come out louder unless there's some way that,
so if it's,
here's us guys,
right.
We're just trying to resolve one thing.
Hey, you guys.
If I go, how about this? Yeah, let's try something, Ms. Martinez, and I think we're going to get feedback, but we'll see.
So, Ms. Martinez, do you hear me now? Dumasani is loud and clear, but Regina is really low. Yeah, I understand that. So how about now? Am I much louder now? Hopefully that this works for you and you can hear me clearer. And let us know if there's any feedback. So what I'm gonna have to do, Pastor Dumasani, is before you talk, I'm gonna have to mute myself on StreamYard so we don't have that feedback. Okay. So now I just have to remember. Okay, so the thing we were talking about is the Jewish diaspora, yes, right? And if we could back up and just talk about, well, I think we can go in order of your book, because I think what you will get to the discussion about the Jews in the different locations across the globe.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Okay, so what is Jewish diaspora really? What does that mean?
Well, and let me connect that to what you'd asked before, and I didn't touch on that whole genealogy. We talked about the curse of Ham, but then in chapter 10, it talks about the dispersing of the nations. The diaspora is the word that comes from the word disperse. It's from the Greek word to scatter. Literally, pick of being on the beach, and you got a handful of sand and rocks, and you throw it, and it goes into the water, and it goes in different directions. No matter how you throw it, it just kind of sprays out. That's what diaspora means. It's to take a group of people and then they are scattered abroad, right? So some are closer, some are further away, right? And the scattering is what actually talks about in the scriptures about Israel being scattered. We talked about this in the Torah. It explains that one of the decrees that Hashem makes is that I will scatter you if you don't keep my Torah. The ultimate judgment, if you will, is scattering. Of course, then he says that I will gather you, the ingathering, right? So when we're talking about the dispersion of nations initially, we're talking about the sons of Abraham, sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. And as you just said, the different regions that they populate, right? When we're talking about the Jewish diaspora, we are talking about a forced dispersion for the most part, right? We talked about the fact that there are three major, right? This is a big overview. Again, we're talking about big generalities. Three major dispersions of the children of Israel, right? Now I'm talking about whether you're talking about the northern tribe or the southern tribe of Judah, the northern tribe of Israel or the southern tribe of Judah. The first one was the 8th century by the Assyrians. They destroyed the northern tribes and they scattered those tribes abroad. The second one would be the 6th century, the tribe of Judah, or the area of Judah, which became known as Judea. They are then scattered for a 70-year period, was taken to Babylon and later on the Persian Empire. Many come back after that 70-year exile. And the last and most ultimate one was the complete destruction of Judea, the destruction of first the temple, then later on the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135 AD, right? The destruction of the temple by the Romans is 70 AD. The destruction finally of all of Judea and the renaming it Palestine happens in 135 AD. And at that point, the Jewish people are scattered throughout Africa, throughout Asia, throughout Europe, right? We took a moment, though, and explained that Jewish people, or the Israelites, children of Israel, whichever term that we're using in a generic sense, already lived in what we call the diaspora. It wasn't as if there were no Jews anywhere other than in Judea at the time that the Romans destroyed. It was just the forced expulsion meant that there would remain a remnant of Jewish people in Judea, and what was turned into Palestine by the Romans, and everyone else that was not killed in that uprising were actually scattered, diaspora again, right? So in one of the things we also talked about was that you see the diaspora, or you see that whole living in different places in Acts chapter 2. Ironically, we just observed Shavuot, the Christians' Pentecost, right? And in Acts chapter 2, Luke talks about Jews from every nation under heaven. We talked about from Arabia, from Egypt, from Rome, from Greece, from Asia, from Persia, from Babylon, literally all over the world, from Europe, the Mediterranean, from Africa, and from Asia, right? So that was already a reality. But when the Romans finally put down that Bar Kokhba rebellion, Bar Kokhba is the name of a man who was actually leading the rebellion against the Romans, that rebellion failed, and it was the ultimate defeat and removal of the Jewish people from the land, again, with the exception of the remnant. And what we talk about here in the discussions in chapter 2 there, it talks about just some, even though we listed there, there's just a few, it's a tiny number of the places where the Jewish people wind up in different parts of the world, right? Over almost a 2,000-year period, right? So you're talking about a mass forced type of migration literally all over the globe. This is one of the miraculous things when we say it, meaning never before in the history of mankind has a tribe of people been literally scattered all over the world in some 2,000 years later, with the exception of the remnant that remained in their ancestral homeland, returned to their home, worshiping the same God still, right? And even the language Hebrew, which almost became an extinct language, was revived, right? Just as the people come back to the land, Hebrew over a period of time revived. There's a street named after Ben Yehuda. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. I think I see.
Yeah. I want to just add something here because some people may have missed yesterday and really have to go back and listen to yesterday's replay. On Clubhouse would be best because the audio is really good. But when we talk about the fact that the children of Israel were birthed in Egypt and Canaan, that means that they had dark skin. Because I can still see people thinking that, oh, all of these, light-skinned, white-skinned people are moving across the earth. And like, no, that's not what we're talking about. What you have to understand is that we got into it a lot yesterday, but I want to keep this top of mind because it helps us understand that Hebrew, the children of Israel, came in many different shades. There's no way that you could be living in Africa, on the continent, in Egypt, moving down and not have melanin in your skin, right? Now, we know that we can have very light melanated people and very dark melanated people. And they exist, and we're going to talk about them as we continue to move on. But this is the reason why we're having the conversation about the Black church and Zionism, because of the racist experience that Africans have had through slavery, and not that other ethnicities have not had slavery, right? We're not disavowing that they've not, but this is a conversation, and his book is about reuniting African and the diaspora to understand that the Jewish diaspora includes you, that it was birthed from the same place that you were birthed, right? You cannot separate yourself from that because we were birthed in Africa and they were birthed in Africa. And so there is an inherent connection there and relationship that has been tried to be destroyed and divided in many other kind of using anti-racist, anti-Semitic language to try to put it so that, that all Jews are white. And so therefore we're going to have this kind of, even if we're not consciously thinking about it, right? The subconscious thing, or like, you're better, you think you're better than me, you think you're not connected to me, you are the ones that oppressed me. And I need you to always be top of mind. And so I appreciate that we have many people of Jewish descent who are listening right now. And we want you to know that this is not anti-hate. We are not anti-white. That is not what our conversation is about. We are trying to help the African diaspora understand that we are more connected with the children of Israel than we've been led to believe, right? And that there is a unifying, that if we can get into sync and partnership, would be a beautiful thing that I think the enemy and many of those who hate the Jews would love to see never happen, right? And so we are having this conversation, and part of the purpose of Pastor Dumasani's book is to help the African diaspora, including Black Americans, which we're going to get to like in chapter 3 or 4, understand how much we are connected. And so when we're talking now about spreading out, you need to understand that even though Japheth's line went up into Eastern Europe and up into Europe, that there was Middle Eastern, and then there's a whole continent of Africa, and that are melanated people. And so we want you to remember this as you're having this conversation, so that there is, because there's been so much subconscious, kind of information out there that there is a white and Black issue, right? And I'm not saying that there's not, but we want to understand that in this conversation, we are here having this conversation to educate the African and the African diaspora that the Jewish people were born out of the same land, the same ground that we were. So I just needed to put that in. So go ahead, Pastor. Go back.
Yes, ma'am. Along with what you're saying, Regina, as we're continuing in this discussion, as you know, one of the things I address in the first chapter, maybe the second chapter, I can't remember at this very moment, is the identity of these ancient peoples in terms of their tribes. And one of the things that we tackle is, for example, the identity of Ham. Now, I want everyone to follow me here. If you've heard me say that the curse of Ham, quote unquote, which is not in the scriptures, Canaan was cursed, right? But if you've heard that the curse of Ham was that his descendants would be black, have dark skin, and that was a sign of the curse, somehow dark skin, which is not true. Right? I even cite a couple of the Jewish sages that talk about the beauty of dark skin. One of them talked about black and beautiful. We actually discussed this in the book too, and they talked about it's not a curse, and also slavery. Curse was black skin and slavery or servitude in terms of Ham's descendants. And I mentioned this, as we said, that the irony is that, as Regina, to your point, that these things get these false teachings are part of manipulative tools to oppress people for all kinds of different reasons. And as Regina said, yes, slavery was all over the world, since the history of man and different types of people. But we're talking about this in a specific context here so that we can relay a message. The same mindset, the Western mindset of Christianity that said the curse of Ham meant black skin. Here's the problem. First of all, that's not true. But when you turn around and say, okay, but Ham had 4 sons, right? Cush, Mizraim, Phut, Canaan, meaning Cush, Ethiopia, Mizraim, Egypt, Phut, Libya, Canaan, right? So after you tried to beat me over the head with racist teaching saying that Ham was black, which was a sign of his curse, and therefore he was then the slave because of his blackness. Well, I just read that the Egyptians were black. Oh, no, the Egyptians are white. You don't understand. Oh, wait, you can't have it both ways, right? Either Ham's descendants were darker skinned, right? Or they were not. And the scriptures clearly say that one of his sons was Egypt. So the pharaohs and the pyramids. So when you see those Egyptians rendered, they're almost always right. Yul Brynner, right? Okay, so wait a minute. Again, you said Hamites were black and cursed, right? And first of all, black wasn't a bad thing, and curse had nothing to do with them being slaves, none of those things. But then all of a sudden, when we talk about these amazing civilizations in Cush and Mizraim, all of a sudden they become white. That becomes the game that gets played, right? In other words, anything black becomes relegated to bad and cursed. Anything white becomes good and blessed. That is never with scripture, but that was the manipulative tool to what you're saying, Regina, so that what happens that over the centuries, over the generations, when I'm reading it as a black young man, I'm seeing pictures because I walked into the church. I'll never forget. We were members of as a little boy, the church, nothing negative about the church, but you saw this all the time in black folks who came up in church, I'm in church, Greater Faith Baptist Church. This is a picture painting, must be 12 feet tall. This white Jesus knocking on the door. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. So every time I came to church, Jesus was, rosy cheeks, kind of blondish hair. It's okay, because they're saying, see that? That's Jesus, right? So I'm going, okay, first of all, the Israelites here in Northeast Africa, Southwest Asia, more than likely didn't look like that. Secondly, if we are not supposed to be drawing pictures of, because the Torah says not to do that, why are you drawing a picture of who you says is the Lord and Savior and then putting it on the wall? The agenda being Jesus was the Son of God, which is good, meaning he's white, or the Sistine Chapel. Here's this big burly guy with looking like Zeus. They say that's God. Wait a minute. Wait, I thought God didn't have a body. Oh, just in case he had a body, he was white. He looks like Santa Claus. Okay, that becomes embedded in the minds of people who don't look like that. And they say, okay, God must be represented in this. Israel must be represented in this. And so, as Regina was saying, this is not about a backlash about being anti-white. This is about, let's actually have a discussion and remove some of these distractions from the table and put some factual stuff on there. Yes, we talk about people of color. Absolutely. Lighter skin, darker skin. But that's just the truth. When we're talking about the diaspora, and that's the fascinating thing, because Jews who were dispersed to Persia, that's funny, they look Iranian. Jews in Nigeria look Nigerian, Jews in Ethiopia, and so on and so forth. By now, in the modern age, you go to the nation of Israel and you see Jews, Israelites of all these different hues, right? After having returned to the land. We're having now a biblical, historical discussion, particularly centered around people who may have felt excluded because you were consistently told that somehow if you look like Regina or me, you were somewhere cleaning up somebody's whatever and you were doing whatever, you weren't relevant. All you were was the butler, the maid, or the slave. And then somehow, like we talked about in school, those of you, one of the faulty things about teaching history in the United States, which is why that whole critical ethnic studies thing takes on a life of its own and it gets distorted. But the reality of it is, yeah, I'm reading the history book. I'm not even mentioned until the chapter on slavery. It's as if my folks weren't invented until they needed somebody to hew the wood and draw the water. And that becomes the story. The story, then that Black young child's story gets told in the context of someone else's needing a servant. They have no other agency. They have no other authority. They have no other industry, but having been this is part of what was actually also part of Christian teaching, which, ladies and gentlemen, is why some Black folks began to say Christianity is the what? White man's God. That's where that actually came from. They're saying the pictures that I've seen, the laws and things that were governing the people who look like me were from people who were Christians who love Jesus. Therefore, I reject that. That becomes a worthy discussion. And one of the things you've got to do, you remove ignorance, is just having authentic history and authentic conversation. So absolutely, when you're talking about these biblical characters, right, and you go in the region, right, these people, lighter, darker in terms of their melanin. And I even say it in the book there that there was a rabbi, a teacher who was a Jewish teacher from one of the Bible colleges, I can't remember now. He was saying that even in the Western world, they would reject, depending on how they are acculturated, even what would be like a stereotypical Middle Eastern looking Jesus. They would reject that for someone who looks like he was tan and born and raised in Los Angeles, California. They were saying that even that, in terms of that mindset, where I'm convinced that here's what God, quote unquote, looks like, that becomes very detrimental, especially when you're using these things to oppress other people, right? And that it's a difficult conversation, but I wanted to just kind of say that as well. So to that last part, Regina, yes, the diaspora, and we'll go back there. The diaspora, the Jewish people scattered from this place in the world where Africa is right there, Northeast Africa, Southwest Asia, right there, scattered all over the world for nearly 2,000 years. And again, I want to say to everyone, you're talking about a long period of time. You're not talking about just a one thing where they're put in a boat and just get over here and go over there. You're talking about over a long period of time, to Greece, to Rome. In the book of Joel, chapter 2, I believe it is, Regina, I won't try to click on my thing and turn to it here. There is, and Joel is written sometime around Joel and Zechariah, so you're kind of close around the Second Temple period. You're talking about still another 500 years, about the 6th century or so, if I'm not mistaken, the prophet Joel. And in the prophet Joel, it talks about God's judgment on the nations for their abuse of Judah, their destruction of Jerusalem. And God, through the prophet, names 2 nations, Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon would be on the coast of what we now see Israel now, close to where Lebanon is, right? They were sea coast. They were a sea trading people. That's where they got much of their wealth from. In that text, God convicts Tyre and Sidon for doing what? Selling Judas, the sons and daughters of Judah, as slaves to the Greeks. Ladies and gentlemen, you're talking about over 2,500 years ago, right? Here, they're talking about being placed on ships. It doesn't use the word ships, but these are a seafaring. It's as if you're talking to cities that are in a Chicago or in a San Francisco. Much of their wealth comes from the shipping that's actually happening for a long time. It says, you're taking my sons and daughters of Judah, and you're selling them as slaves to Javan. Javan was actually the descendant of Ashkenaz, which was where the Greeks come from. And why am I pointing that out? Here you're talking about an enslaved Hebrew people, right? even long before you get to the diaspora of the Romans, as we talked about, but centuries before that, you already have a people that are fighting against and then taking Hebrews and selling them as slaves. So there's forced migration, that forced dispersing is already going on, right? And they're being taken from this Middle Eastern, this North African region, and then taken forcibly to what becomes Mediterranean and Europe. This happens a long time ago. This is one of the stories of the Israelite people having fights, wars, conquests, and those types of things, and then being taken and shipped off from the land. So I wanted to interject that as well.
That's really good. Okay, so that's really good. And I appreciate how you helped us to understand that even in the book of Joel, and we can see it in other places where God does punish nations for selling the Hebrew children as slaves.
Yes, ma'am.
So the idea that people were being sold as slaves is not new, right? And so we're not downplaying slavery at all.
Right.
But what we're doing is talking about that the selling of people who lived in North Africa is recorded in the Bible. That's what we're getting to. And can you grasp that? So there is such a connection then, if this is if this has been going on, right? And the Hebrew people came from the same dirt and the same locations that is Africa. And they were being sold up into a territory where people had a lighter pigmentation than they did. Right? And so the African slave trade, as we see it now, and as it's been documented, maybe documented in our American or African history, but there is a Hebrew, there's a Torah, there is a biblical Tanakh, Old Testament history that also speaks of people who lived in the North Africa, that lived in the Middle East, who were taken and sold as slaves to people in a territory of lighter pigmentation.
Absolutely.
And so the story is here. And we need to be able to kind of move back to that and understand that the history of slavery of people from that territory has been happening. Right. And I appreciate that you are helping us with this biblical history, right? Which some of us I know are going to go back and study even more, like, oh, I never knew that was that meant that, you know? And so you've got to get the book. I have the link pinned up top and in the chats, Zionism and the Black Church. You really, really need to get that book and start reading it, because there's so much scripture in there, right? You might think, oh, it's just his opinion or it's just conversations, but I'm here to assure you that there is a lot of scripture in this book and a lot of history that you're going to be able to glean from. And so if you want to kind of move on and talk about the diaspora. So we know that they were taken as slaves, and we know that that part of that happened because they were disobedient to Torah, right? This is why they were brought. But there's also a prophecy that the Father is going to bring them back, right? And that they're going to come back. So if you'll talk about, and this is where we got that word Zion from. So first, Pastor Dumasani, I'm going to ask you to explain Zionism, right, and Zionist, and then go ahead and bring us into kind of the prophecy of the Jews now returning back to their homeland.
The word Zion is first in the scriptures when we hear about David, the third king of Israel, capturing the mountain of the Jebusites. It is named the fortress Mount Zion, the Jebusite mountain. He calls it is the city of Jerusalem. These are synonymous when you talk about Zion and Jerusalem. It's about the same area, if you will, right? Which is why they are to this day used synonymously, right? For example, when Regina, when we read Psalm 137 yesterday about the captives in Babylon, the Judean captives, now slaves in Babylon, and their captors are demanding a song, as you were saying. And then they were talking about the songs of Zion, right? The song, sing us the songs of Zion. That word became synonymous with Jerusalem. It became synonymous with the holy city, the temple, all the things associated with what became the spiritual and political capital of Israel, of Judah, right? So Zion is the holy city. Zion represents the focal point. Even in the Torah, God says that when you come into the land, the place that I will show you will be where you bring my sacrifice. He was talking about Zion. He was talking about Jerusalem. He didn't say it by name. That was only revealed during the time of David when he captures that mountain. Zion in the modern sense is or Zionism is the belief that then Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, right? It has all kinds of political implications. And because it's such a pregnant word or such a volatile word, meaning it has so much in it, it gets all kinds of debate. But at the end of the day, Zion becomes the holy city of Jerusalem, the capital of the nation of Israel, right? And so a Zionist is someone, whether they're Jewish or not, to someone who believes, Dr. King, for example, was a Zionist, someone who believed that he didn't preach, and as I say before, biblical Zionism that we can record in that sense. We don't have that. He makes the moral case for Israel being able to exist and defend itself, which I know we'll get into later. So then Zion becomes, in the diaspora, the longing to return, whether those Jews are in Kaifeng, China, whether they're in India, whether they're in Jamaica, whether they're in Nigeria, whether in Ethiopia. One of the things that actually connects this connective tissue is that these Jewish families, these Jewish homes, however they've been scattered abroad. And let me just say real quickly here, not all of them, over a period of, again, a couple thousand years, some became traders and went out and left the area and going from place to place, sometimes forced because of anti-Semitism, sometimes going on and finding other places to provide for their family like any other people. So you had the Jewish people, like anybody else, also moving in different places. The Jews who left Europe in the late 1800s and later on in the 1900s, who came here to the States, particularly those periods leading up to the whole Nazi Germany and the rise there, those who came here, those who came from Russia, right? They came to find somewhere else to live and to protect their families, right? So this would be the same as any other diaspora people or people who are moving in different places. But what you had was this connective tissue. Our Jewish brothers and sisters, when they come together, they'll say the phrase "Leshana haba b'Yerushalayim," next year in Jerusalem, right? That there's this longing, there's this one of the many stories that have always just captivated me when I've talked to so many of my Ethiopian Jewish friends, whether Beta Israel still in Ethiopia or the Ethiopian Israeli community, was about how for millennia their elders talked about Jerusalem, how they longed to go to Jerusalem. One of my Ethiopian Israeli friends is telling me is around the late 1800s. There was a group of Ethiopian Jews there who believed that it was time for them to return and that they were going to walk there. And they believed that God was going to open the sea for them the same way that he did for the children of Israel in Exodus. And he said they went there. I can't remember which body of water it was that they had actually come to. He was explaining this to me. And he said they prayed. And when God didn't do it, they said, okay, well, maybe this isn't the time. And then they go back, right? So you have this thing. Why are they in Ethiopia longing? As a matter of fact, Jerusalem Day in Israel is also the remembrance of the over 4,000 Ethiopian Jews who perished in Sudan, trying to make their way back to Israel because of how they're being persecuted in Ethiopia. Yes, ma'am.
Talk about that. There's a special kind of connection, especially with Ethiopia, because I am taking some Hebrew lessons and I'm learning Hebrew, Old Testament Hebrew, the Tanakh. And my teacher was telling me that there is a huge Ethiopian community, and these are dark-skinned, highly melanated Ethiopians who not just like converted, they were raised that way. Their great grandparents were Jewish, right? And so what is the special thing with Ethiopia?
One of the things, and while I answer that, I want to say again, both everyone who's listening, Christian or Jewish, one person's story is not elevated. We're talking about some different highlights that are here because I've heard so many different stories, but I want to answer this because it is a fascinating example of this Jewish longing for Zionism, this Zionism that we're talking about, right? So in Ethiopia, and I've heard so many of the different stories, the Kasim is the plural word for Kes, which is the priests, right? And much of the everything from the scholarship to the priestly ministries were focused there with this group of men. There's such a longing and such a connection there. In one of the books I read years ago called Ethiopia and the Bible, the professor there talked about as recently as the earlier part of the 20th century, you still had Ethiopian priests dancing with what they call the Ark of the Covenant, right? The way it would have happened there in the Bible, right? In Ethiopia, they established a holy day called Seged. Seged is celebrated for 50 days after Yom Kippur, and they began to establish it as a remembrance of Torah, the Orit in the Ethiopian language, Amharic. And so there's such a love for Torah, such a love for God, and a love for Israel and Jerusalem. And it's manifested in so many different ways. You're talking about, again, over millennia of being separated from the land and being in the land of Cush, being in the realm of Cush. I want to tell you, there's many, many stories I could relate, but I'm going to give you just one in the interest of time. And I'll make sure I'll keep talking slower, Regina. Don't talk fast. One of the things that's talked about, I've read this in books, and I've actually had this conversation with Ethiopian Israelis, right? Which is that the official Ethiopian aliyah, and aliyah is a word which means literally to go up, but it's what it's termed, it becomes a term meaning when a Jewish person returns to Israel, his homeland, from wherever he's coming, right? So aliyah means to return. So the Ethiopian aliyah, which officially began in 1984. You already had some Ethiopian Jews still living in Israel even before then, smaller numbers, but they came in different ways. But the official, where the Israeli government with its planes, working with its secret service and the other coordinators of the Ethiopian Jews, one of my good friends, Yafa Tegene, her father was one of the architects of the Ethiopian Aliyah. He actually helped coordinate this whole thing. And this is before the Red Sea diving resort. Any of you who've seen that movie on Netflix, there's an actual story about what's called the Red Sea diving resort, how Israel had this fake resort that was there to extract the Ethiopians who were in Sudan, the Ethiopian Jews. It's an amazing story. But anyway, this point is this. When they got there, right, here are Ethiopian Jews who have been longing to return to Zion, singing songs of Zion. It's like Black Americans are singing songs of Zion over here, where they're singing songs of Zion. Do you know one of the things that happened when they got to the modern state of Israel? They had been cut off from the broader Jewish community for so long that some expected that the temple was still there. So when they got to Jerusalem, they said, I want to go to the temple. And they told them the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. They said it blew them away, meaning the other Israelis, they watched them. They began to weep and wail and mourn as if the temple had just gotten, because to them, this was new. To them, this wasn't something that happened with the Romans back at the beginning of the first century. To them, they had just learned that the temple was destroyed, and they began to wail because of its destruction. That's the type of emotional connection that's there when you're talking about the Ethiopian Jews. And it's not unique to them in terms of the diaspora, but that's one of the stories that would maybe tell someone who doesn't understand what this Israel thing, this Jewish thing, this Zion thing. So that's one of the things that might help you understand that for the Jews who longed to return, those Ethiopian Jews, when they realized there was no temple, there was only the Western Wall, which is part of Herod's wall that he built there. That was the last remaining structure. They were brokenhearted and began to cry.
Okay, that's good. So you have to help us also with Sudan. How is it why were they trying to escape Sudan? You would think like, okay, that's like me saying, I live in Georgia and I'm trying to escape Georgia to go to Maryland. Like, I don't get that. So help us understand, because we would think it's all the same land. Like, why are you trying to escape, and why would you be murdered as a Hebrew trying to get to Israel?
No, excellent question. So during the over millennia, some 2,000 plus years of Ethiopian Jewish presence in Kush, right, in this region here, particularly now in the modern age, you had different waves of pogroms or persecutions that would happen to the Jewish people. Again, ladies and gentlemen, one of the connective tissues of the Jews in different parts of the world, whether they were black, brown, whether they were white, wherever they were, you had the same way the Jews were persecuted in Russia, persecuted in Germany. They would be persecuted in other parts of the world, including in Ethiopia, including in Nigeria, where there was a slaughter of some 3 million Igbo in the late 1960s, right? And these things aren't often recorded in that way for many, many different biased reasons. So during this particular wave, there was different times, different governments that would rise. There was a communist government that came up at some point. They began to persecute different tribes and different peoples. And some of the ones that are made on their hit list, if you will, were the Jews, right, in different regions. Ladies and gentlemen, those who are aware, even now, the Tigray region of there that's connected to Ethiopia, there's been all kinds of wars and fighting and all kinds of ethnic cleansing that's happening. Again, the news doesn't report on it until it's in their best interest. But again, there's still a lot of volatile things happening in these parts of the world, including Nigeria, where Christians are being slaughtered by the tens of thousands every year, right? So the only reason I interjected that, Regina, I want people to know these are not far off things. We are dealing with these things right now as we speak, right? So what happened was, as it was more and more unlivable in Ethiopia, some of the Ethiopian Jews began to then migrate and leave and cross the border. And you're right, because it wasn't like it was necessarily safer. They tried to do it secretly, because if the Sudanese saw them, they would hate them because they were a Jew. You talk about an anti-Semitic, here you go, somebody who wouldn't understand, well, that person's black and that person's black. What difference? Nope. If you really understand hatred for Israel, you understand that it permeates color. This is not about color. The fact that they were all black Africans from Eastern Africa made no difference. If they knew that those were Jews, they wanted to kill them because they were Jews. This is why they got persecuted in Ethiopia. The term falasha, everyone, is not a good term. A lot of people use that term generically. Falasha means outcast or outsider, meaning you're not from here. Ethiopian Jewish enemies called them falasha. They didn't call themselves falasha. They called themselves Beta Israel, which meant house of Israel. The outsiders called them falasha, meaning you're not from here. You may look like me, right? But we know your history. You came from that Israel place. We don't like you, right? So there would be different times in which they would be persecuted. This was one of them in the modern age. They crossed the border because what was being coordinated was that Israeli planes would then land and pick them up, many in the dead of night, and pick them up and then bring them to the nation of Israel. This is after a long period of time of planning, because this didn't just happen. They're being coordinated. I recommend a book to anyone who wants to read it called Baruch's Odyssey. Baruch, like the Hebrew word to bless, Baruch, Baruch, Baruch's Odyssey. It's the story of Baruch Tegenye, again, the father of my good friend Yafa Tegenye, and it talks about some of those events that led up to the Ethiopian Aliyah. So yes, ma'am, Sudan was not a safe place for them. They were just trying to make their way so that they can coordinate with the Israeli pilots to be taken to Israel from there, right? So it was a very, very dangerous trek. And again, I want to let everyone know, it is said that over a period of time, 4,000 Ethiopian Jews perished. Perish, meaning they were either killed by Sudanese, they died of starvation, they died of disease, right? Why? They perished trying to reach Zion. Again, most people could not wrap their brains around being so connected to a land that they were willing to put their lives at risk to return to Zion. That's exactly what they were doing.
That's good, because it helps us to understand that, we have this modern phrase now here we call black on black crime, right? Where we're killing each other in our inner cities. But what we're talking about there, even though they're the same color, this is not about just crime for random. This would be, it would be racist, in the sense that it's an ethnicity. No, I couldn't have been racist. What's the other word for when you, it could be a hate crime because of their religious beliefs. Okay, let me rephrase that. Sorry. Racist would have to be about ethnicity, but you're the same ethnicity as me. But it is that correct? Are they,
Well,
help us with
no, you're right.
ethnicity and
No,
religion,
no, no,
right?
no.
It gets
Yeah,
complicated.
Regina, you're absolutely correct. This you're underscoring the complexity of unpacking these things, right? They can be complex themselves. Ethnicity generally refers to what ethnic group you're from, whether you're Asian, if you're Vietnamese, if you're Filipino, or whether that the ethnicity will often, that Greek word ethnos is what actually comes from, a people. Race often refers to color, but again, these words get so just mangled, right? And I want to say this again. I mentioned this yesterday. Part of the reason is because of how race was so weaponized in the West, especially in the United States, right? When you're dividing people, I mean, once again, in terms of the black thing, we weren't even considered humans, right? It's okay, these people aren't real people, but those kinds of really evil, wicked things that had nothing to do with someone's humanity, everything to do with how much melanin there was. But unfortunately, that's part of what became a legacy in the States here. Someone said, can you please give us the link to the book? So that was on, I'm sorry, some quick question on IPSI on Instagram, ibsi.org, and you'll see the book Zionism in the Black Church. I'm sorry, that's just for the people on Instagram because they can't see this part. ibsi.org, and you'll see the book there on the store there, Zionism in the Black Church. So to your point, though, Regina, you're absolutely right, because the race ethnicity. So this would have been an ethnic strife. It would have been, in other words, the Sudanese who would then purposefully hurt or kill Ethiopian Jews was expressly because they were Jews. The same thing in Ethiopia. Here is this Ethiopian who's not Jewish. Here's an Ethiopian who is. And so the persecution, they called them, those who hated the Jews, Buddha, which is a word meaning evil eye. That said that they were skilled in witchcraft. They were good with money. That sounds familiar to you? All the same anti-Semitic tropes that we see in the West, those things were applied to the Ethiopian Jews by other. That's where the word Falasha came from. Meaning, if I were non-Jewish Ethiopian and Regina, you were Jewish, I would call you all those names, right? By saying, and what I was really saying to you is that you don't belong here. I don't care how long you've been here. You're not from here. Your people aren't from here. You're Jewish. You're an Israelite. Therefore, because of my hatred for Israel in that sense, yes, now I hate you. This is what our Ethiopian Jewish brothers and sisters experience oftentimes there in the land.
Wow. That's really deep when we begin to break it down and to break down the layers, because we think that that somehow the struggle or the hate for Israel is not real, right? And we have groups of people, and we're going to get into, I hopefully today, before we end this call, we are going to talk about what is a Black Hebrew Israelite, right? Because that is very important to make that separation on how they started, and that there are multiple types of Black Hebrew Israelites, right? There are different types of group even within them. But before we get to that, just understanding that hatred for Israel, hatred for Jews, right, and Hebrews. So even if you aren't of the tribe of Judah, right, you are still considered a Jew because you are one of the 12 tribes, right? So just to help with that, is that there is this hatred for God's people. And that is real. It doesn't matter what color you are. And you can be the same highly pigmented color as the person who is of the bloodline, and I'm going to hate you, and people hate them, and people kill them and slay them. I was reading also in your book about how and I didn't realize this, that there are Jews in Iran and Iran won't let them go.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it Iran?
Absolutely.
Could you explain that? How are there, like, it seems like Iran is a Muslim territory, so why wouldn't they just let the Jews go? What is that about?
So the Jews of Iran are largely descendants, not everyone to a person, but you're talking about the Jews of Persia. Iran is modern day Persia, as Iraq is modern day Babylon, right? So these are the regions, right? These are the regions when you're reading about these lands in the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, Esther, Artaxerxes, who was the king of Persia, right? You're talking about roughly the areas of Iraq and Iran. So that means that the Jewish people in Iran is a state like any other. So you have different religions and different ethnicities and expressions that are there. But now we're talking about roughly that region. Many of them trace their ancestry back, and I have many friends in the Persian Jewish community. Same thing, because sometimes we say Persian Jewish community, Iranian Jewish community, kind of interchangeable. Sometimes they'll use that terms themselves. They're a large population here in the United States. One of the large concentrations is in the LA region. I have several friends and colleagues that are there, wonderful people. And I've heard so many of the stories. I love hearing first-hand accounts in terms of first, second generation, how they left certain lands and what their ancestry was and their story. So you have to date, and some people argue and they kind of debate about the numbers, but generally speaking, in Iran, Persia, right, you have about a little over 8,000 Jews who live in Iran. Now, Iran, up until 1979, was, and I don't know the whole history, I'm talking about a more modern thing, was very friendly to Israel, friendly to even the Western world, the United States. The last leader at that time was the Shah. He was deposed in the late 1970s. And what took place, that place was a regime led by the Ayatollahs, Ayatollah Khomeini, and I believe I'm saying his name correctly. And then the Ayatollah today is his successor, right? It's a very brutal Islamist regime. If you Google pictures of Iran pre-1970s, ladies and gentlemen, it'll look like Tel Aviv, it'll look like LA, it'll look like New York. You got ladies on the beach with the old school bathing suits, and everybody's walking around. It's very, very modern day society. So the Iran today, very different than what you see today. The full burqa, the cover of the faces, the women can't uncover. Right now, the Iranian people, and shout out to my Iranian Jewish brothers and sisters and my Iranian Christians. Like I'd be remiss if I don't say this. The Christian church is growing fastest in places like Iran right now. There are many Iranians coming to faith in Jesus. Much of that revival, or that move, if you will, is led by actually women. Women are the pastors of many of these churches, in large part because of how the men are often targeted and taken out. So you have this amazing human rights thing that's happening. Again, the media does not talk about. So the Jewish population that's there is often subjugated. It's often threatened. They have their own synagogues, they have their own Jewish lives that are there, but they are not free. And I do talk about that. You're absolutely right that there's all kinds of lies and distortions, right, that are being said. Oh no, they're fine, they can go where they want to. That's not true. There are Jews. I talk about a story in there in which I guess is around the 1990s, was a story that the Times of Israel had actually put, and actually may have been in the early 2000s, where there's a group of Iranian Jews who were trying to escape and make Aliyah, the same way I was talking about the Ethiopian Jews, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're seeing this picture. Jews in Iran, Jews in Ethiopia, people who are being subjugated, even if they look like the other people around them, if they hate Jews, it's not about a color. I'm going to say it's not about a color. It's about a tribe, right? And the Bible even equates hatred for Israel. Psalm 83, God, he said, they hate us because they hate you. It actually says this in the scriptures, right? So the Iranian Jews that are there, they are subjugated. I'm not saying everyone's not. The Christians are being persecuted. Women are being persecuted. Journalists, this is not just a Jewish thing, but I'm saying that the Jews in Iran are also persecuted because they're Jews. And yes, that's happening. Can I tell this one quick story, Regina? We talked about the Mizrahi project while I was
you read my mind, because I just posted in both of the chats and in the chat on Clubhouse. I put the link to Kufi and the Mizrahi project.
Okay,
you need to go there when you have time and watch those interviews. So, I mean, you're just going to be so amazed when you watch those interviews. So go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
I get chilled when I see it. And I also put a link to Baruch Odyssey, the book. Somebody asked me about that as well. So if you see that link there in that StreamYard, you can drop that there too, Regina, for them. So the Mizrahi Project is a story. It's a project of short films, a series of short films about Mizrahi Jews. And those of you who were here yesterday, you're talking about Mizrahi roughly means the Hebrew word roughly meaning from the east. Jews from Iran, from Iraq, from Algeria, from Egypt, from Morocco, from Turkey, right? So we're talking about North Africa and the Middle East, roughly this region of the Jewish people, which again isn't talked about very often, not nearly as much as it should be when you're talking about the entire Jewish diaspora and the people of Israel, right? So in this story, my colleagues, amazing, Raj and Dan, they just, so we were interviewing first and second generation Jews from North Africa and the Middle East who were expelled or forced to flee from those regions where they had been for over 2,000 years, places like Yemen, right? Places like, again, Algeria, places like Syria, right? So we were talking, we did a series of them, and you can go on YouTube, the Mizrahi Project. And those of you who are Googling it on your own, I think Regina put the link there, but oh, that's right. My better half is there. She's putting the link there in IG, so I don't have to do that part. So these are individual stories. They're short films, 2-3 minutes. The longest one, maybe 4 minutes. They're giving you a brief synopsis of their story, how they fled Yemen, right? How they fled Egypt, how even Morocco, where relatively speaking, the Jews of Morocco fared much better than most of the other Jews in the region. They'll tell you there's a specific king, I can't remember his name now, was very good, pretty benevolent, but there were still problems and issues that were there. And there's one gentleman tells the story, David, can't remember his last name right now. His father or grandfather was smuggled out of Morocco, right, to come to the land of Israel when Israel got its independence in 1948. Well, I tell the story about one young lady who lives in LA. She's from the Persian Jewish community. And when we were contacting different Persian Jewish community members in different parts of the country about being a part of this film project, and we were so, I won't tell two stories because I'll get distracted, but it was heartwarming to do because many of them felt like no one cared about their story. They were telling us this, right? So one young lady we were connected to via email, and I tell this story book. She responded to the email and basically, if I can paraphrase, said, "Thank you very much, Pastor Washington, for what you and your team are doing. This is amazing. Thank you for telling this story, particularly for you as Christians, telling the world about the Jews from North Africa and the Middle East, telling about my family and everybody in Iran. However, I must decline to be in the project." And she went on to explain, "I still have family in Iran." This was 2016, 2017, ladies and gentlemen. We're not talking about 50, 100 years ago, right? "I still have family in Iran, and I have no doubt that once this film is seen, my family will be in danger of being hurt, jailed, or killed." In other words, if she gets on the camera and says, "Here's my life, I was a Persian Jew, this is how we fled," that the Iranian regime would take it out on her family. And I say in the book, it hit me then. Here we are telling these stories about diaspora and history, this, that, and the other. And it was right now, not just 100, 200, 2,000 years ago. Right now, this young lady had to decline to be in the film because she knew her family would pay the price for her simply talking about her life in Iran. And yes, that was one of the things that hit us. And we got from our Mizrahi brothers and sisters when we would see them on the road, we'd be going different places, often with tears in their eyes. Regina, they say, "Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Kufi. Thank you, Christians United Faithful. Thank you for telling this story. No one really knows about our story, or people don't really want to hear about our story." So yeah, it like I said, it hit me at that moment even more so that these weren't just ancient stories. These were stories just like our Christian brothers and sisters in Nigeria, our Jewish brothers and sisters in Iran right now, and our Christian brothers and sisters in Iran right now are facing all kinds of hurt, destruction, imprisonment, all of those things. And so as Christians, we pray for them, obviously, and to those who pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we are remembering that diaspora as well.
Great. You got to get the book because he has sections in the book. There's the Jews of Eastern Europe, because we're just not going to have time today to go through all of them. The Jews of Spain and Portugal. There's the Jews of China, the Jews of Peru, the Jews of Jamaica, the Jews of Africa. And then he talks more about the Ethiopian Jews. He gets into that. The Lemba Jews. Did we talk about that? They're the Levitical tribe.
No, ma'am. Not together. We haven't. I mean.
Okay. So why don't you do Lemba and the Igbo? Because I think those are interesting, and that'll take us right into the Black Hebrew Israelites.
Yes, ma'am. So the Lemba are a tribe of Israel that is.
I'm not his boss. He says yes, ma'am. That's just like a habit.
It's a habit.
I think he's saying it because he's scared of me, right? He's not scared of me.
It is. No, ma'am. Very polite. So everybody knows that I have 5 daughters, 1 son. And when they say daddy, I say yes, ma'am. So I say ma'am to women. That's just a habit. It's ingrained. It comes from the South, even though I wasn't raised in the South. So yes, it's not it's just a term of respect. So absolutely. So the Lemba, and they have different stories in terms of their origins, but just for the sake of time, they are located or situated in the Zimbabwe and South African region, right? They are part of their oral history is that they came through Yemen after leaving Israel. Yemen is the furthest eastern part of North Africa. They're Northeast Africa, if you will. They're connected to Ethiopia, right? And that they over a period of time traveled through Ethiopia and then south, and then wound up living in this over a long period of time. Everyone, a long migration, right? I even got some stories about the Beta Israel, the B'nai Israel, who are one of the tribes of India, who also were connected to Lemba, but that's another conversation. So it's very complex, right? I'm learning, even years and years studying this, still learning different things. So that's what the Lemba are. The Lemba, then again, we're talking about the whole melanin. They look like somebody who looks Zimbabwean. They look like somebody who looks South African, right? So they are a tribe. As a matter of fact, there's a young man, Oded Mamzidze, I'd have to see his name correctly. Oded is the head of the Gauteng Lemba synagogue there in South Africa. He is the leader of the Orthodox Jewish community, one of the leaders of the Orthodox Jewish community there in South Africa. He lives he goes back and forth to Zimbabwe. And that's just a heads up for people who want to know more about it, or you want to support them. Go to our website, ibsi.org. Click on donate. You can actually support their synagogue that's there and write it off on your taxes, right? So that's who the Lemba are. Again, priestly tribe, meaning the part of the story is that even before the destruction of the first temple, that there were some priests who left living in the area. Nehemiah called it the area of Senna. If you ever read that before, how the Jews returned to rebuild the walls and everything, they remember the Levites who were living in Senna. We believe that Senna is modern day Yemen, right there connected to Ethiopia. And we believe some of them returned for the returning to the rebuilding of the wall of the temple and everything, Ezra and Nehemiah. Some of them did not and continued to live in that region, and then went further down south through Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and parts of South Africa. And they would then be priestly tribe. For those who count DNA as an issue, some people discount. There's been all these arguments. What was established by Tudor Parfit, who is a professor there at Florida International University, had the honor of meeting him a few years ago with Remy, my friend. He actually helped get the information about the DNA study, and they found that the Cohen gene. Now, again, let me pause. For those who are of the mindset that the whole Cohen gene, I'm sorry, my dog is barking, right? The Cohen gene and all this other stuff is nonsense, has nothing to do with someone who's from the priestly tribe. I hear you. There's different arguments that are there. But for those who take that as a DNA evidence, and because there's different schools of thought, it was said that those Lemba had the highest concentration of that Cohen gene that they had seen from any other priest around the world. Right now, again, this is what was said by scholars and everyone. Again, I'm not a DNA scholar. I'm not any of those types of things. I've read the material and I've seen that. That's who the Lemba are, and that is part of their tradition as well verbally. They'll say, we came from Israel, we came through Senna, and we came down here over a period of a long period. And that's who our roots are, those types of things. And our friend Oded is part of that tradition. The Igbo are situated in West Africa, Nigeria, Benin, that area. They are a tribe, right? They trace their ancestry. And again, I recommend everyone, my good friend, again, Remy Ilona. He is what I always call an elder of the Igbo community. He lives here in the United States. He is from the Biafra region of Nigeria, which is where many of the Igbo lived and continue to live. And he has done so much scholarly work. Those of you who are familiar with Remy's work, you know what I'm talking about. Giving so many different receipts, right? What's called omenana. Omenana is the Igbo basically explanation of what, for lack of a better way, what Torah, in other words, Torah observance, who Moses was, what the different rituals were, the different observances and everything. And there's been a group of Igbo there in the West African region who have been following that for generation after generation. Many Igbo are not. They don't follow that. They're Christians. Some are Messianic Christians. Some are more, not so much Messianic. So it's a large tribe that's there. They believe that they were scattered after the destruction of the northern tribes, and they connect their ancestry to the tribes of Gad and Asher from the northern tribes of Israel, right? So that's who the Igbo are. The connection to the United States would obviously be during the transatlantic slave trade of the several different tribes that were focused on and that were sold into slavery. The Igbo was one of those large ones. There's a large percentage of Igbo that were actually taken in the transatlantic slave trade, which would then mean that if you are a person who believes that the Igbo are part of the people of Israel, that would mean a large percentage of them were taken over. Those 40 million taken over that period of time to the New World, both North, South America, as well as the West Indies.
Good. So yes, take a drink of water there and a breath, because we're still going to wear you out just a little bit more. What's wonderful is that also yesterday we talked about the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic. And so some of us have heard the phrase about Ashkenazi, and those would be the Jews up towards Europe, right? Generally speaking. Now they are different melanated there. So it's not that it's just that all Ashkenazi are Caucasian, right? There's Ashkenazi of all types, but up there, because their pronunciation of Hebrew is different and their writing of it is a little bit different. And then you have the Sephardic, which are Spain and Rome. Is that right? Spain and Italy?
Spain and Portugal, around that with the Iberian.
Okay. The Sephardic Jews there. So one of the complaints that Black Hebrew Israelites have, right, is only kind of focusing on European Jews, right, on the idea that of the skin color, right? And so what I want to transition into is just to have you explain to us how we got Black Hebrew Israelites in the first place and the different groups that exist within them.
Okay, yes, ma'am. So, and I do talk about this, the term by now, particularly in this time in our history, particularly in the United States, Black Hebrew Israelites, again, is a very loaded term because it doesn't refer to one group of people, right? And it's sometimes the different iterations of the name, Hebrew Israelite, Black Hebrews. I mean, there's different terms for that, right? There's not one group. And so there have been groups that have splintered off. There is an older history. So what I do in the book, ladies and gentlemen, I give an overview of basically three branches, three categories, if you will. One would be the Black Hebrew Israelites or Hebrew Israelites of Dimona, Israel. They would be those who were Black Americans who left Chicago in the late 1960s and kind of retracing the whole slave route, went to Liberia, were there for a while, and then from there went to Israel. Now, you're talking about an oversimplification. That's an over, because we could unpack that. It was a controversial move. What I mean by that, even from the synagogue that they came from, there was disagreement. So it was a breaking off. That synagogue is a congregation. So it's a longer name, but I'll come back to that congregation in a moment, right? So they were led by a gentleman, and somebody else kind of took over the leadership. That was the whole thing. And so they've been in Dimona, Israel, based there, that group, since around the late 1960s. Okay. Controversial even when it got there, because they weren't making an official aliyah. They were just moving there and saying, we are Israelites, we're going to live here. And that's a whole nother discussion too, right? They have been there all of this time. Some have come back to the States and left, many stayed. Many largely integrated into the broader Israeli society, having served in the IDF, and they married and children and those types of things. I know some of the younger members. I know some of the older members as well, right? So that's that group. The other group that is still based, their main base is there in Chicago, led by Rabbi Capers Funne. Looks like it's spelled funny, Funye. He is the leader of the Hebrew Israelite community that's throughout the nation in different parts of the world. That group traces its origins back to the 1800s by a couple of particular people. But and again, that origin is it's complex. But suffice to say, there were Black Americans, particularly post-slavery, who identified with Judaism. Some who believed that they were the Israelites of the Bible. Some who didn't necessarily believe that, but felt that they were drawn to Torah observance and everything. And so you had different thoughts that were there. Some, in terms of the broader thing, who were hostile to the feeling that white Jews were not real Jews, quote unquote, and some who didn't feel that at all. They felt that they were just part of a broader mosaic, right? You had that group that goes way back a long time ago. Again, oversimplification. For those of you who know the details of the history, you might say, but you're not mentioning this. There's a lot, because we'd be here for 2 hours just breaking down all the different groups, and we don't have that. I'm trying to give this a broader view, right? So again, Rabbi Capers Funne, who has a great relationship throughout the rest of the Jewish community, he, among many others in that group, have actually gone through Orthodox conversions, right? They've actually done this, the more of the I don't know the word, I don't say ritual, I'm not saying in a negative way, but they've actually done that part as well. And not all, right? But some have actually done that, right? The third group, if you will, again, very general, ladies and gentlemen, just in the interest of time, is unaffiliated groups in different places. They are in the UK, they're in the parts of West Indies, they're out the United States. Sadly, there is a wing of that group that's somewhat, I'll call extremist. They are very anti-Israel, anti-white, anti-Ashkenazi, in terms of white or lighter skinned Jews, the whole thing, right? Now, again, that's not anywhere near the majority of that, but it is a group, right? And they have numbers, right? They'll teach bad, they'll use scripture to kind of bash the Jews, bash Israel, that type of thing. Again, it's not the whole group, but it is a group, right? They use that term, Black Hebrew Israelites, and most people are familiar with that last section that I'm talking about, because both of some of these very, very negative things that have taken place, this shooting in Jersey City, in which a couple they were loosely associated with, we don't know if they were actually a part of a different a specific congregation, if you will, but they shared some of that negative Hebrew Israelite propaganda on their social media. And then there's been other incidents like that, a stabbing in Monsey, which is another Orthodox part of New York. And so there have been those things that, though they are not the majority of those other groups, as I'm saying, they, of course, because of the horrific nature of them and the media and everything. And so also some of that negative group would be the ones you've seen on YouTube, some of you, yelling at people on the street corners, what I call some very confused brothers, quoting the King James Bible and thinking that they know Hebrew and just really coming against people, really in a very negative and violent sort of way. Even pastors, they are, for those who are listening to this, and we've been kind of tracking and aware of the different groups for years. This is nothing new for us. I mean, when I became first aware of the Dimona Hebrew Israelites, that was back in the late 90s, right? Where the internet was barely a thing, right? And I'm sure so I've been tracking this for a while, right? So, and I'm saying how smart I am, just saying I've been kind of watching certain things, right? So what you have with the negative one, I'll say this last thing, it's very also confrontational, even with other Black folks, particularly they're Christians. Some of these groups will go to churches on Sunday morning, and they'll go, confront people in their parking lot, passing out flyers. Your pastor's a liar. He's not teaching you the truth. I mean, just very disrespectful, very dishonoring. I had a phone call from a pastor friend in the DC area about 2 weeks ago, right? And we worked together with IPSI. They're just amazing. That you'll be hearing more about the IPSI pastors and everything. He let me know. He said, Pastor Dumisani, I wanted to let you know, we still have to really connect and get all the details. He said, part of those groups, the negative group that I'm talking about, unfortunately, now he said what they're starting to do is they're going to these churches on Sunday, taking their version of their hip hop, because they have, some of them have their own music that has a lot of very negative kind of killing stuff in it, right? Kill white Jews, kill this. I mean, this is actually happening, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually happening, right? They would blast the music, right? As folks, they're talking about Black church. I'm not talking about going to even to a synagogue, which would also be wrong. They're blasting this music, and as people are coming out, they're saying all kinds of nasty things about their church. This is what's actually happened. Again, very confused. Most of them are young men, not all of them. And that's why when you say that term, depending on what people know about what I'm explaining to you, if they don't know anything about maybe the Demona group, they don't know about Rabbi Capers Fune, they may only know this negative thing that I'm telling you, and this has been a real disservice, which is another thing that we do with our organization, Regina. We teach these pastors, here's this group here, this is differentiated from this here, so they will know how to interact, know how to have the discussions, know how to even help. You mean some of young people who might get caught up in that whole negative, almost cult-like thing that's actually going on. So yes, I know that was long, but when you say Black Hebrew Israelites, it's a very, very broad spectrum that you're talking about.
Great. Thank you for that. We're going to come to a close here because we are at the end of chapter 2, which worked out well. I did open up the hand raising. So if you had a question or a comment and you want to come up and ask your question, or you have a comment to make, you are welcome to join us or come up on the platform. Just raise your hand, or you can put your question in the chat. So while we're waiting for people to get up the nerve to raise their hand and come up, we just want you to know that Pastor Dumisani and I, we had only planned on 3 talks, but then we realized that we probably need to do more because we don't want to rush through this material. And it's not that I want to spoon feed you his book either. I'm going to keep telling you, even though you've heard this conversation, you have not seen all of it. You really need to get the book. And we're only in chapter 2. And so we are going to meet again on Wednesday at 4 p.m. this time, same time. And then Pastor Dumisani and I will work on his calendar and we'll schedule some more conversations. There'll probably be possibly a 2-week gap because he goes to Israel, and when he comes back 2 days later, I leave for Nigeria, right? And then I will be over in Africa for about 2 months, 2.5 months. You'll still see me on platform and things like that, but my timing may be a little bit off. So I will be over in Nigeria with Every Black Life Matters with Kevin and Neil. We will be teaching in Abuja. And I mentioned this because I want you to keep us in prayer. Obviously, definitely keep Pastor Dumisani and his group in prayer as they're over there. But then as we go into Abuja, our group will have to have 24/7 security while we're there. So it's no joke that they kidnap and kill Christians. But we're going there to speak, and this is what 1040 does, right? For those of you who know the organization, and it was co-founded with Major Daughter in South Africa. And so we will be there teaching on wokeism and how, and I think this is going to be interesting, Pastor Dumisani, when we start getting into the prophetic return to Israel and what's happening in prophecy, because that Gog and that Magog, that China and that Russia, who are there, who are buying up properties and lands and things like that over in Africa, and they are pushing a very communist agenda to young people. So I want you to know that next Sunday night, 1040 Window will be having a conversation about nations, because I'll share with you what we're going to be doing over there. I will be going on the Egypt-Israel tour. So I'll be meeting with ambassadors and nations over there and summit. But then after that, I'll leave. I'll be in South Africa with Major Daughter. And then we will be meeting with other nations. I definitely plan to make it to Tanzania. And I'm not sure what other nations yet. We have to kind of schedule those things. But we're going there because, and this is not your grandma's mission trip. All right. that we're not doing that. We are going to be teaching about Torah, but more than that, we are going to try to help them understand Commonwealth, create microloan business programs for the young people, for women, help them to build skills, because, we can't just go over and talk about Torah and maybe build a house or two or a school and then leave. What we need to do is empower them to be able to build their finance, because if they can finance and build their own communities and make their own money and support themselves, they're not going to be as susceptible to China and Russia and the communist agenda. You know that the UN is pushing the LGBTQ agenda in the nations in Africa. They're starting to deny certain countries US aid, withholding money from them, unless they accept the agenda of teaching about abortions, making that available to their children. And so making it available and telling them they have to take on teaching LGBTQ in their schools to the young people, tied to governments having to accept the aid. Right. So there's a lot of things going on, and I'll talk about that more next Sunday night. So you can find that on 1040 Window. And I'll be talking about going over there and what we'll be doing and how we'll be staying in touch and the ways that you can participate. Right. Because many of us have skills and things that you want to be a missionary, you want to give back, or there's things you can do now with technology. Right. And we're going to need people to help with learning English, to help with teaching how to do a business plan, to help with writing, many of those things that can be done via internet now. And so I'll be talking about that next week. So I've hoped I talked enough so that, no one has any questions. So I thought someone would raise their hand or put questions in the queue. You have any questions on IG?
Let me see. Sure, long as some other conversation.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. All right. No questions. Okay. So there's a lot more. So anyways, we will be back on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to continue in chapter 3. So please listen to the replay. Please share it. This is out on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. So you'll be able to find it in other places if you want to share it on your social media page, if you want to share it with friends and family. You'll find that outside of the Clubhouse network, so it'll be able to share. Since there are no other questions, Lonnie, you've been so quiet. Anything you want to add, Lonnie, to the conversation? Are you there? He may have stepped away.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Lonnie may have stepped away. No problem. So I'm going to give it over to you, Pastor Dumasani, to do a wrap up and pray us out.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So again, I want to thank you again, Regina, for hosting on the platform here. Oh, I think I heard a noise. Am I hearing Lonnie? I thought.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir. No problem. Yes, sir. No problem, sir. Yes, sir.
Nothing to add.
Okay.
Great job. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, Lonnie. My friend, known him for a number of years, Lion Chasers Radio, the whole thing. So just appreciate all the work that Lonnie continues to do in the community and beyond. So again, Regina, thank you again for hosting, and even the 1040 I keep saying that the other 1040 Window Missions Network there for those of you, again, those who've been on IG. If you're on on Clubhouse, again, look for the 1040 Window Missions Network, and you'll see these events that we did both today and on yesterday. And again, in the book, link is there as well, Zionism in the Black Church. I just want to say also that yes, our IBSI ambassadors are headed to Israel just in a few days, right? So if you want to know more about that, go to ibsi.org. I want to give also a shout out. We have a great staff who works on tirelessly on a shoestring budget, to say it that way. And so we are nonprofit. So if you want to, you or an organization, church, synagogue, or would like to sow a seed and be a part of that, we'd love for you to do that. Again, we are strictly nonprofit, and what we do is by the generosity of our donors. What's that? Question. Oh, there's a question on IG. Someone just pointed out to have you of the BHI. Have you tried to engage with any representative of the BHI? So I see this question on there, just answering on there. Yeah, as a matter of fact, so every group that I referred to you all, like the whole broader groups, we have conversations, communication with others. So in Dimona, I know contacts there as well, and colleagues. Rabbi Capers Fune, we've emailed before. I haven't talked to him directly, but I have no members of the community that are based in different parts. Yaakov James Walker is part of our IBSI ambassadors, who works throughout the Jewish community and everything. And so, yeah, so to answer that question, yeah. So everything that I'm saying to you about the different groups and as general as it is, I'm saying that not just having read, but this is firsthand knowledge. I talk to people. So yes, I'm well. Even the group of, like I said, some of the young men, like I said, were very, I call confused when I'm talking about, like, when you're preaching a lot of, kill these people and these people aren't the real Jews and let's that stuff that's just really not ultimately helpful. Yes, I'm aware of that as well. Have talked to, engaged these young men before. So absolutely, yes. So everything I'll say, like I say all the time, Regina, what we're doing right now is the social media virtual world. But like yourself, when this is not on, we're actually in the real world doing the actual work and talking about it here. Like the young folks say, don't talk about it, be about it, right? So we talk about it here to share with many people, but then we have to actually go out like you all are doing in Nigeria, and I commend you all. It is, and we'll be praying for you all and everything too. There's a lot that's there. Beautiful country and everything. I've never been myself. I know friends from there. I haven't been able to get to the west part yet. Been the eastern part of Africa, the southern part of Africa. Hopefully later on this year, get to Ghana, get to Benin, and maybe possibly to Nigeria. So again, I want to thank everybody for the time. Again, we do need your help as an organization. So please go on the website, check that out. If you want to give, we would love for you to do that as well, or tell your other organizations about it, as well as we are just days away from heading out to the Holy Land, right? So we solicit your prayers. I do want to say as well, though, I am a pastor and a Christian, and IBSI is not necessarily a religious organization. These IBSI ambassadors, they're Jewish, they're Christian, right? Younger, older. I always say young people because I just a habit of mine, but they go from the 50s all the way down to the 20s, right? And they're amazing. When you'll see what I'm talking about. Just amazing. So thank you for all you all support and everything, and all you IBSI supporters. Thank you so much. I need to say this real quick, Regina. We were having to raise a large amount of money in a short period of time, and we're still working on all that now. We're doing some different things, and our donors, amazing donors. I mean, in what was like 4 weeks, we had like $150,000 target that we were going towards. In like less than 4 weeks, donated some $75,000. I mean, just amazing. So please, I want to say again, we are so touched by that. That's whether your companies, your foundations, your personal, that's your hard-earned money. And when you're saying, hey, I believe in what you're doing, here's my gift for you to continue to move forward, please know that touches us as a staff and as our ambassadors very, very deeply. And we very much appreciate that. And we'll use the gifts that you've given to us to the utmost to do the work that we're called to do. So thank you so much. And I'll pray, Regina. God, I thank you for your faithfulness to us. Thank you for this opportunity here. Thank you so much for Regina and the ministry and the work that you've called her to, both in whether it's ministerial, entrepreneurial, all of these things. God, continue to bless the woman of God. Continue to watch over her. The whole team, Kevin, Lonnie, everybody who's going to Nigeria, who's going to Egypt, who's going to Israel. We thank you that you will be with them, that you'll go before them, your hand of protection upon them, and that you'll bless that their work, that their ministry, that their messaging, and God, and for all those, even we see that they'll be connecting with Rabbi, boy, my eyes are failing me, Yehuda Glick, there while they're in the land and everything, God, and the different ones that they'll be touching base with and working with and ministering with. God, I thank you so much for the amazing things that you're doing in their midst. So continue to have your way. Thank you for all those being able to join us today. Would you use these conversations for your glory, God? And we thank you. You said in your word, in all of our getting, get understanding. So we want you to continue to teach us and lead us, God. Bless us, God, even the rest of this week. We trust you for it. Thank you for keeping your hand on all those who are traveling in their homes and their families, whether they're traveling abroad or just traveling close by. Just keep them safe, God, and watch over them. And we give you thanks and praise in your precious name. Amen.
Amen. Oops. Amen. Thank you for that. All right, everyone. Again, we hope to see you on Wednesday. We'll be back here at 4 p.m. and we'll be discussing chapter 3 of the book. And enjoy the rest of your holiday, those who are in the United States and those in Africa and abroad. Good to see you. I'm sure you're tired, so thank you for staying up with us. All right, everyone. So this room is going to end in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And shalom to you on YouTube and Facebook. We'll be back.
Uh-oh.